Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. Today we're talking about car training some more. If you can hear me, please comment. I'm not 100% sure if my audio should be working, but yeah, I think it is. All right. So if you can hear me, I'd very much appreciate a comment or a thumbs up or something. All right. So the last few weeks we've been talking about car training, and in particular, dogs who are afraid of going in the car, don't want to get in the car, shake, cry, throw up in the car. This is part 3. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about what can you do with your car setup and sort of with your dog's routine and maybe medication before getting into the car to make it a more positive experience for them. Last week, we talked about teaching them to get into the car on their own. And today we're going to talk about driving, actually, training our dogs to be, well, we can say be more comfortable, but training them to do behaviors that we think might help them to be more comfortable in the car, help us be more comfortable in the car, other than to replace some of the behaviors they're doing right now that you might not enjoy and they might not enjoy very much. All right. So as usual, if you have any questions as we get into this, if you post them under wherever you're watching the video, I'll get them on my screen after a short delay. If you're watching this as a recording, you can still comment and I'll just get a notification and I'll get to it as soon as I can. All right. So getting into our slides, part 3 of car training is actually being on the road, driving places. As a reminder, this kind of training is for dogs who we would say don't like the car. So they refuse to get into the car, or once they're in the car, they bark, they howl, they cry, or maybe they pant really heavily, drool, shake, sometimes maybe throw up. So have appear to hate the car, hate being in the car. The 3 pieces we've broken this down into over the last few weeks. What can you change right away? We talked about that 2 weeks ago, and you can find that video and a little write-up on our blog. Last week, we talked about training your dog to get into the car on their own. And again, that's also located in the blog. You can find last week's material there. Today, we are talking about training for the drive. So your dog can get in the car. Now, how can we, go places without trouble? So just a reminder, if you happen to be joining us this week for the first time in our car training series, this really is meant to come after talking with your vet about whether medication might help your dog in the car. And that could be sometimes anti-anxiety medication is helpful. Sometimes anti-nausea medications are helpful. Sometimes both. You've already experimented some with what kind of car setup is best for your dog. So do they do better in a crate or not in a crate? Do they prefer the back seat or the far back of the car? Do they like to see out the window, or is it better for their view to be blocked? And you've trained your dog to get into the car on their own. So this is, unless you can pick them up and they're happy being picked up and placed in the car. So this is the stuff you want in place before you dive into this week's training. All right, so our to-do list for the actual training for driving in the car. I'd like you to think about what kind of behaviors you might want your dog to do when they're riding in the car. What do you think you would like? What do you think they would like? Might make the experience better for them. We'll need to decide. You'll have to decide on your own, ideally with the help of your trainer or a veterinary behaviorist, how to make or when to make the training harder or easier, like when to take a step forward in training, when to back off and make it take a step back. And you have to know what is harder or easier for your dog. And some of this stuff is probably seems kind of common sense, but we'll go over some ways to break down the car ride, and then I'll show you Pancake's example, how we did this for him. All right, so what behaviors do you want? Now, It used to be I didn't really think about this. I didn't think about particular behaviors in the car. I was focused on um, body language and just creating positive associations with the car. But it can be quite beneficial, I think, to keep an eye on observable behaviors. Body language is an observable behavior, of course, but look at behaviors and try to think about whether there's anything you could train that might help. And some things that maybe you would try your best not to reinforce. So, for instance, climbing out the window would be one behavior that you might not choose to reinforce. You could think about, would sitting be something that would be good for my dog to do in the car, or lying down, or is standing up better for some reason? Head out the window, is that something they enjoy and is safe? Some dogs like to put their front paws up and look out, the back or the front window. That may or may not be something you want to encourage. So specific behaviors are step one, to think about, what do I want my dog to do in the car? The next is, how do I decide when to advance in training and when to back off? This is honestly the place where probably most people run into trouble. So how do I change difficulty in this training? You have to decide when you will make it easier. And I'm usually pretty conservative with this. I'll show you what we did with Pancake. I back off with when there are small indications that it's too hard for him. When will you make it more difficult? You also need to know when you'll stay where you are and say, you know what, I'm going to try this step again. And if you are a dog parent who is trying this on your own, is kind of trying to DIY it, I'd like you to think about when you might decide to reach out for professional help. What would it take for you to decide, okay, I can't do this on my own and I need someone to help me? So some examples for when to change difficulty. These are just general examples. They may or may not apply to your dog. For instance, you could say, hey, I'm going to make it easier if my dog barks at all in the car, because maybe barking is something your dog does in the car right now and you're trying to get them not to bark in the car. Okay, if there's any barking, I'm going to back off of my training. And or if any of the behaviors that I'm trying to build and reinforce in the car are happening less than half of the duration of the training session. So if you were trying to teach your dog to sit in the car, you say, well, he wasn't sitting very often. He only was sitting for like a quarter of the time we were training. I think I need to back off and make it easier. These are just examples, so this may not be appropriate for your particular dog. You might decide, okay, I'll make it harder if they're doing the behaviors that I want, that we're training at least 80% of the time, and there's no barking or, no problem behavior. Maybe you could repeat if behaviors are happening at least half the time, but maybe not up to 80% of the time, and there's no barking. And maybe you might think, okay, I'm going to seek professional help. If I go for a week of this training, I'm training maybe most days of the week, and I'm not making any progress. So again, these are not specific guidelines for you to follow. It's just an example of how you might delineate your criteria for moving through your training plan. All right, so we talked about what behaviors we're going to train, when to make it harder or easier. Then we need to think about, well, what is harder or easier for my dog? How can I break down the car ride into pieces that they can do and they can work through in a training plan? So again, this is going to be individual to your particular dog, but some things that often matter to dogs who are afraid of the car or don't do well in the car are whether the car is on or off. So some dogs, you do have to start training with the car parked and turned off. Moving or parked. So a lot of dogs do best if you start with the car not moving. How long you're moving. Once you start moving the car, are you moving for a few seconds, a few minutes? How fast you're driving. Some dogs start to exhibit more of those sort of problem behaviors, the behaviors that maybe we think indicate they're not feeling great, they're a little anxious if you drive faster. And some dogs do worse when you drive slower. How bumpy the road is, whether that be going over a curb, going in and out of a driveway, or speed bumps. I noticed Pancake has a particular dislike for the rumble strips on roads. So that's something to keep in mind in your training plan. and also turns or like the curviness of the road. Many dogs I personally have worked with dislike appear to struggle more with a curvy road compared with a smooth, straight road. All right, before I dig into an example to show you how Pancake worked through this, and I was pretty proud to find this picture of a dog trying to eat a pancake. Any questions? You can go ahead and put them below the video. I hope that the example will clarify some things for you, you know, sort of put it into concrete terms, even though, of course, you know, your dog is going to be different than Pancake, and so they'll need some personalization to their training. All right, so what do we do with Pancake? We're going to talk about those same 3 things I just gave a kind of general overview of. What behaviors do we choose to train? When do we choose to make the training harder or easier? When to move ahead in the training, when to step back? And how did we break it down for him so that it was doable? Okay, so car behaviors. What car behaviors did we want for Pancake, and how did I decide on them? I observed Pancake in the car before we started this training. Most of us discover we need this training by taking our dog for a drive and being like, wow, they are not okay. You saw some video of his pre-training behavior 2 weeks ago now in the very first installment of the car training series. And he would bark and howl a lot. And I noticed that he had a hard time settling down. He would often be standing up. And possibly, I mean, standing up is probably less stable for many dogs in a moving car, but certainly for Pancake, who only has one front leg and easily falls over generally, he was stumbling and losing his balance and falling over quite a bit when he was standing up. So I noticed that, and so I decided probably he'd have a more pleasant experience in the car if he were sitting or lying down, so he wouldn't be falling over so often. And I talked about how we identified the booster seat as the place he was going to ride in, I think a couple weeks ago. We tried the crate, was not a great fit for him. Booster seat was easier. All right, and then one important thing about when he needed to stay seated or lying down in the car is even when there was, not even when it was bumpy, but especially when it was bumpy. Was hard for him. Initially, when there's a bump, he tended to pop up and get kind of concerned, but then he would also be more likely to fall over because there was a bump. So the bumpiness of the road was something to incorporate in the training for the sit and down behavior in his booster seat. Sorry about that. All right, so just a quick overview. I won't go into all the steps because it would take a long time, but to show you what we did with Pancake's training him to sit or lie down in his booster seat. I actually started with the booster seat in the house when it came in the mail. I unwrapped it in the house, and I just introduced it there with treats and encouraged him to climb in, which I believe you saw sometime in the last couple installments of the series. Once he was quite happily sitting or lying down in his booster seat in the house, I added some motion, like some rocking and kind of jostling the seat, and I'll show that to you. And I actually didn't have this in my plan right away. I added it in after trying this sit or lie down in the car in the booster seat and seeing that the bumps were really problematic for him, that when the car kind of jostled around like that, it was hard for him to stay seated or lying down, but he also then fell over. So we went back and said, okay, let's work on some of this motion in little pieces that I can control better than I can in the car. Let's do this indoors and then move it out to the car. All right, so let's look at some video of our little guy. All right, so here we are in the house. That's Pancake's booster seat. This is a 2-dog training session because Juno wanted to participate, so she's doing a downstay on her mat. And basically, I'm just, tossing him treats periodically for staying in his booster seat, seated or lying down, and then alternating with Juno so she doesn't feel too left out. And this is a really nice, his booster seat's really comfy to him, it seems. It's kind of fleece lined, and I would find him curled up in it quite often. So in addition to doing a structured training session like this, where I, asked him to get in and then reinforced him or gave him treats for sitting or lying down, if I ever just found him in it, settled in it during the day, I would, be sure to give him some treats. All right, and here I just have a few examples of introducing movement. I actually put the booster seat up on something, so it was a little more, I don't know if it mattered, but it seemed to me to be a little more realistic. Being in the car, he'd be up off the ground a bit. And just doing at first very small bits of movement, pulling on the booster seat. And I probably should have taken this a little more slowly. You'll see him occasionally do a lip lick, like he's not sure about it. So once he was able to stay like that, stay seated or lying down, when I was giving the booster seat a pretty good shake, we then moved it back out to the car. And I'll go more into this in a clip in a little bit, but here we were just then practicing staying seated or lying down just with the car parked. But remember, this being in the car, if your dog already has a history of traumatic car rides, you may need to make it really easy in the car at first. So even though he could tolerate that booster seat jostling around in the house, when I moved it into the car, we started just with it as still as possible, just with the car quietly parked in the driveway. All right, so we talked about what behaviors, a sit or a down, is what I am looking for Pancake in the car. Now we'll talk about how we moved through the plan. How did I decide when to make it harder or when to make the training easier? So remember, in general, these are the questions we're asking. When will you make it harder? When will you back off? When will you repeat the current step you're on? And so Pancake's changing difficulty plan looked something like this. If there was any signs that I associate with anxiety for him, he does a heavy, sort of fast breathing and what is often called stress panting. So if there was any of that, or any barking or crying, no matter what else he was doing, even if he was sitting or lying down the entire time, if he was doing any of the stress panting or barking, then we'd say, okay, that's too much. We need to back up to an easier step. If he was sitting or lying down at least 3/4 of the time during a training session without, any of the stress panting or barking, then we would move ahead in the plan. And if it was something less than that, he was doing sitting and lying down, but not up to 3/4 of the time, but he also wasn't showing signs of stress, what I'm calling signs of stress, the panting or the barking, then we'd say, let's stick here and try this a few more times and see what we get. So I have some examples of what these three sort of criteria pieces look like for Pancake. So here we have some heavy panting. It's really hard to hear in the videos. I can hear it when I'm sitting in the front seat of the car. I can hear his breathing. I think in this clip you can, so I'll be quiet for a second, see if you can hear it. So I don't know if you could hear that on the video, but if I could hear him doing that fast, heavy breathing, that would be one sign like, okay, this is too hard for him. Also, if he wouldn't stay seated or lying down for a large portion, of the drive, like less than half. So there he did sit down, but he was having kind of a hard time. He wouldn't stay seated or lying down very often. Oh, and I put this into slow-mo to remind myself to point out, even if you can't hear stress panting, what's called stress panting, which is usually fast, heavy breathing that happens when a dog appears anxious. It goes along with usually some other signs like dilated pupils, sometimes ears back. Sometimes they're shaking or tail tucked, things like that. One thing that you can look for that I see in my dogs often, if they're doing this kind of panting, is that even if you can't hear it, you'll see the corner of their mouths. Their mouth is open really wide. It's kind of like panting when a dog's really overheated. So you'll see him in profile right here. You see his mouth, the corners of his mouth back here are drawn back. His ears are back just a little bit kind of to the side. So this is, when I see this face, it's likely he is doing that heavy breathing. That indicates he's anxious, or I think he's anxious anyway. So that's something I can watch for, even if I can't hear his breathing very well over, the car fans and stuff. All right. So that was the when do I back off? And maybe those signs, depending on how much experience you have reading dog body language and also just your biases, those videos I just showed might look like, why, that's not a big deal, I would keep going. Or you might think, oh, I would have stopped, an hour ago. Not that we were in the car for an hour, but that's where we stopped. Those videos that I just showed you, after, I saw that, the next training session was easier. Now, when did I make it harder? I wanted to see mostly sitting or lying down during the drive. So here's an example where we went from car off to car on, and he stayed seated and he's not doing that heavy panting stuff. Here we're driving down the street slowly. There's some bumps, but he's still mostly staying seated, waiting for his treats. So those two clips, say, okay, we could probably push it just a little bit next time, a longer drive or whatever. And then when did we repeat? The current step is when I wasn't seeing these signs of stress, but he wasn't doing that much sitting or lying down, like between 50 to 75%, I would say. So for instance, sorry, this is a little dark. It was later in the day. He kept getting up, and partly he seemed to be getting up to find the treat I threw in there into the booster seat, but he was spending a lot of time up. He wasn't looking stressed to me. I wasn't seeing that heavy breathing, and there was definitely no barking. We never got to the point of barking or crying in training. Here he is again standing up, but I was like, okay, well, I'm not getting the behaviors that I'm trying to reinforce, so I'm not able to reinforce them very often. I'm getting some, but not much, so I'm going to back off. So then we would make this a little easier. Does anyone have questions about this changing criteria, when to make the training harder or easier, like how we decided this with Pancake? Again, it'll look differently with your dog, of course, but all right. Next. Finally, let's talk about how we broke down the training for our little guy. How do we break down the car ride into manageable pieces? So we did start with the car off for him and just worked on his sit or down behavior in that booster seat with the car off and parked. Then I turned the car on and we worked with the car on and parked. Then I did some really small movements. I'd like just ease off the brake and let the car roll for a few feet, just a few feet at a time. Oops, sorry about that. And if he could sit, stay seated or lying down and wasn't doing any heavy panting or barking, then we'd move on. Backing out of the driveway was a step we stayed on for a little bit because it's a pretty decent bump when we back over the curb. So we worked on that for a little while. Once that was going okay, we drove down the block a ways, then around the block, and then we started going on little drives and extending the duration slowly. So like yesterday or 2 days ago, we did about a 7-minute drive. And I'm driving him almost every day right now because we have to drive to go somewhere to walk because of the closures in our area due to wildfires. So we're getting a lot of practice with this, and there's not a great deal of urgency, so I'm just slowly increasing the drive time, as long as each drive he's, handling well, staying seated or lying down, eating his treats, looking happy, not barking or doing that heavy panting. So I'll just give you a few clips to show you the progression here. So here is our work, right? Car parked and off, and he's hanging out in his booster seat. Again, car parked and turned on. I don't know why it took so long to give him a treat. Let me get, oh, there's one. Okay, sorry, that was longer than I thought. Here, I think I'm going to be just inching. You can only tell really by if you look out the very dirty back window of my car, but I'm just rolling back a foot or two at a time. Then backing out of the driveway, you'll see on this one, I think he did get up. It took a while before he would, and then he sat down again, but it took a while before he would not pop up going over this curb. And, I don't need him to never stand up in the car. Remember, the criteria for making it harder is like 75% of the time he's doing it. Here we're going to head on down the street. So a little more duration. I think this might have been the start of going around the block for the first time. I know it doesn't look super exciting, but it usually when train's going the way you want it to, it doesn't look super exciting. Here we're going around the block here, I think. And I'm just giving treats periodically when he's sitting or lying down. That's something that I'm slowly increasing that interval between the treats now. Early on, I was giving treats, every few seconds, every 10 to 20 seconds. And then this is just a quick clip of a recent drive to a walk. So this is probably a 5-minute drive or something with all the dogs loaded. Juno looks a little grumpy there, but so it's going well now, these trips to our walking locations that we're doing almost every day. And how long did this take? Once I actually started training in earnest, it took a few weeks of being really careful. It may well take you longer. And if you're DIYing it without the help of a professional, it will probably take longer. All right. So again, just a reminder what we covered, how we broke this down. We talked about what can you change right away to potentially make the ride more pleasant for your dog. How can you teach your dog to get into the car on their own? And then today, how can you start driving without any of the barking, howling, drooling, etc. that you're currently dealing with? So the immediate changes, just as a refresher, since this is the last installment of the car training series for Pancake, we looked at, did exercise before his drive make it better or worse for him? Did it change his behavior? How about medication, anti-anxiety, anti-nausea, and how about changing our car setup? And if you were with us 2 weeks ago, you remember that exercising him before the drive didn't really change his behavior much. Doesn't mean it won't change your dog's behavior, but it didn't help Pancake particularly. Medication helped a lot. Anti-nausea did not, but anti-anxiety meds did help. And we worked with our vet on tweaking that, the dosage and timing. And then the car setup mattered a lot. So in a crate, he would struggle much more. So when we got him out of the crate, it was better. The back seat it was hard to tell whether back or front seat was better, but back seat safer. So I popped him back there. And he needed to be able to see me. So I couldn't have him, in a totally enclosed crate or have a visual barrier up. And then last week, we talked about how we taught him to get into the car. And just a reminder is how we broke that down. Walk up to the car, walk up the ramp, put your paw, really it should be one paw, put your one front paw up in the car seat, jump in, then climb into your booster seat and stay there while the door is closed. And I know this looks like a lot of steps, but really we work through these in less than a week. And that's only a few minutes a day. And then today we talked about the car behaviors. Because he was falling over a lot and seemed unstable, I wanted to get him to sit or lie down more often. And so that's what we worked on in his booster seat. And now we have a relatively happy and uneventful daily drive to our walking location. We're slowly building duration there. For long drives that are longer than he's ready for in his training, we're using extra anti-anxiety medication to make it, to hopefully protect our training and to not, so the ride isn't too terrible for all of us. All right, guys. If you would like help with this, please contact us. You can also join our Facebook support group where people share their stories about their own dogs, and we're in there answering questions when we can. And that's the link there. The link to our online training membership where you can get some one-on-one help should be above this video. And our email, if you have questions, is admin, ADMIN, @dogkindtraining.com. So we'd love to hear from you if you try this and it goes well or it doesn't go well and you're wondering what to do next. We will try to help. All righty. So thank you, everybody. Are there any questions about car training? Has anyone tried, since the last few videos we did, tried adjusting where your dog is riding in the car, tried talking with your vet about meds, maybe some training for loading up, anything like that? It takes some patience. As you can see, these are small steps, and a lot of them you have to repeat a lot of times, and often you have to step back from what you thought your dog would be ready for. But, if it's a pretty big limitation to not be able to drive your dog anywhere. So this is one of those situations where for quality of life purposes for you and your dog, it's probably worth the time investment. And I don't say that lightly. As I have mentioned many times, I'm kind of a lazy trainer. If it's not really important, I probably won't train it. But this is not one of those things that goes away. Like, you're always going to need to be able to drive your dog, bare minimum, at least to the veterinarian. So it's not something you can get away from. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining today. I hope this was helpful. Do remember to reach out for help. You can reach out to us, certainly, or if you're working with a trainer or your veterinarian. It can be difficult to work through this on your own. I hope that some of these sort of general guidelines we talked about in the last 3 weeks give you some ideas, but the plan that worked for Pancake probably won't exactly work for your dog. So you will need some tweaking of the plan. All right. I don't see any questions. So have a wonderful week. I hope to see you online on our business page or the support group or in our membership. And next week we'll be moving on to a new topic yet to be determined, but I'll be here same time next week. All right. Bye, everybody.